Good morning, David. Thank you for making the time. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Productivity Mastery Podcast. It's Friday. I'm really warmed up. I'm coming back home from a 3-day event in Timișoara, Romania, where I worked with 10 startups on performance and culture. But I couldn't be more excited to be talking to my guest today. He's coming back to the podcast, and he's one of my favorite, I don't want to say influencers because the word influencer now has so many meanings, but one of my favorite leaders in people management that I've been following now for years, because this guy he has so much experience. He's been in the world of HR and people management now for 22 plus years, working for organizations like SolarWind, Flare, Eventbrite, Niantic, Zendesk, Twitter, Electronic Arts, Universal Pictures. But beyond anything else, he's such a giver. He's such a no BS person, and he's such a giver, sharing so much insight. So if you're not following him on LinkedIn, first of all, go check him out. Follow him on LinkedIn. But then, I can't wait to dive into that, David. Thanks for coming back.
Stoyan, hey, thanks for having me, and good evening where you are. So thanks for having me on.
David, maybe let's start from that. You're now working for SolarWinds, and maybe just to give a bit of a context for everybody joining us, what is your role right now? How many people do you have to lead? Tell us a little bit about the organization.
Sure. Yeah. SolarWinds, we're about 2,200 employees. We're locations around the globe. I'm based here in Austin. SolarWinds is a B2B software company. We've been around for about 25 years. We're in the IT observability management space. So IT teams use our tools to monitor their entire tech stack. And we've gone through a lot of transformation. We're going through transformation now. We've been acquired a year ago by a company called Turn River, private equity company. So there's a lot of change inherent in that. And so I lead the people success team, HR, recruiting, total rewards, people systems, workplace experience. And it's been a lot of fun, having a lot of, really interesting challenges to tackle, and have a great team, about 50 to 60 people, I think, total in my team.
So you joined the company, you said like a year ago, right?
Yeah, I joined January 2025, and we were acquired in April 2025.
Okay. So now, after having all this experience, joining different organizations, working in different places, what are the first things that you look for? I mean, obviously you're the people person. What are the first signs to get a sense of the culture of an organization?
Yeah. Well, for me, in terms of, what I look for in terms of if I'm going to join in this capacity, like leading a people function, there's a lot that's important there in the connection between the CPO and the CEO. So, do you have similar views on people and talent? Do you have similar values? Can you effectively challenge each other? Can you have really tough conversations? But what I look for in a strong culture, I don't necessarily look for a culture that I think is, what I'll call the best culture in the world. Like, hey, go join this company because it's already the best. I definitely look for a culture where there's room to continue to grow, to build the culture. There's an ideal that they have. But one thing that's stood out to me in terms of what we strive for, as you build culture, there's an article that came out a few years back from HBR called The Culture Factor. And what you're aspiring towards in that article is what they call convergence. So this is, everyone around the globe, whether you're in finance or your engineering team in Brno, or you're in the sales team in the Charlotte office, we have a convergence around the type of culture that we aspire towards. And when we're at our best, if you ask someone in the Charlotte office or the Brno office or the Manila office, they say similar things. And so that could be, we're a learning culture, we're a results-driven culture, or we're an empathy-oriented culture. And that convergence is what you hope for, particularly as you scale. Divergence is, there's all sorts of different sensibilities. The engineering team, the Dublin office, they're saying different things. That's divergence, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But what they found in the culture factor is convergence is more likely to yield to positive outcomes. Things like for your customers, for the velocity of the organization, ultimately for things like profit and sort of the bottom line. And so that really shaped a lot of how I think about culture. And it's less about, your engagement scores. It's less about, it's the best company or the best culture for everyone. Because some people might want to opt into that culture. Some people might want to opt out of it. They actually don't want to be part of it. And knowing who you are, whether or not everyone will like it or not, knowing who you are and what we aspire towards, and we can kind of call out when things don't align with our values or don't align with our culture, that convergence aspect is something that's really shaped how I think about building culture.
Super interesting, man. And you've been a part of many different organizations, also in different industries, from entertainment and SaaS
Mm-hmm.
and all kind of different things. I would imagine each of those organizations had very different cultures.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
wonder,
definitely.
do you see any universal kind of features of a healthy culture? And what are the universal features? Maybe and then maybe you can give us even some examples of like how some of the companies you work for had differences in the culture as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So Universal Pictures was definitely a lot different than Twitter, let's just say. And when I first joined Twitter, there was actually a little bit of a sense of anarchy, and they wanted to be the world's town square. So they're the free speech wing of the free speech party. They really wanted to democratize and open up speech around the globe, free speech, and that was internally as well. So things like transparency, challenging the CEO openly, disagreeing to the point of I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do. And that was very different than Universal Pictures, which was very command and control. It was a much older company, been around for 100+ years. And it was, the Hollywood was, like who you were, the title that you had, that denoted, that really, kind of signaled who ultimately can make the decision, and deference to authority. And that was very different than Twitter. There was no sort of authority that really commanded everyone to do what they want to do. It was the best idea wins. And, like our hackathons and sort of like where our roadmap ultimately was less shaped by authority and more shaped by ideas and ideals. And so, but, what are markers? What are markers of good cultures? There's probably a few. I think in a strong culture, what good looks like. So meaning there's a clarity of standards. Everyone knows what good looks like, and everyone knows what's unacceptable. I think in good cultures, whether it's, let's just say you might not want to be at Tesla and Elon Musk company, and maybe you'd rather be at a Valve, a software company up in Seattle. Very, very different. But either way, in both of those organizations, one that you might want to be part of, or one that you want to be part of, if it's a good culture internally, there's high trust. There's high trust and there's candor. There's candor internally. People can say the hard thing openly. Maybe a couple more, in healthy cultures where we know what good looks like, a third thing that I would say is inherent is decisions can be made quickly. So you have velocity. In unhealthy cultures, decisions, debates linger on, because we don't know what good looks like. We can't challenge openly. And so, it's really hard to make decisions, I think, in unhealthy cultures. And that can be, a 2,000 person company or a 100-person company if it's unhealthy and don't have fast decision making. I think accountability, something we talk a lot about at SolarWinds. We talk about mutual and self-accountability. But in accountability, you own your outcomes, not just tasks. And you don't need a heavy process, to enforce performance. And then maybe one last one, learning velocity. So, we do postmortems. We really seek out when we make a mistake, and we depersonalize it. We want to understand what happened, and people are not sort of covering themselves and covering their tracks, but we identify mistakes quickly, and we turn them into improvements, and we learn, without, a lingering sort of sense of punishment or someone's going to get fired for this. And the org gets better every quarter because we have a learning orientation. I think Peter Senge talked about that, was something we really embraced at Twitter. So those are 5 markers, that I think define strong culture.
Excellent, man. These are the kind of the universal ones. And I'm just now curious. So you joined a company, a new company, let's say you haven't been
Yeah.
a part of. Do you do any kind of for yourself, because that's your role? Do you do any kind of a culture audit assessment
Yeah.
initially to understand where the company is? And then the second part of the question is, how much do you try to impose your own kind of style and understanding about the culture, and how much do you respect what's already there and trying to nurture and enhance that one?
This has been a mistake that I've learned from in my career, which is a sort of a personalization of what I think good looks like. Earlier on in my career, I had personal ideals. I also thought about like, what are great companies doing in the software industry, and like, let's write those down and then try and adopt them. And there's tissue rejection inherently in that. And I think what I've learned to do is, whatever company I've joined, Twitter, Niantic, SolarWinds, I'm now learning more and more to really understand what is at our core. What are we like when we're at our best? And it will be different from the last company. And that's what's cool. That's what's exciting for me, is that there's a difference. And so what I try and learn, you mentioned culture audit. I really think that engagement scores are a microcosm of a culture. Engagement, your engagement survey, even the comments, which are gold, is still a microcosm, because that's more of the strength of the culture. It's not really who we are at our core. So a culture audit would be more like getting out around the globe. And I've definitely found this in global companies. I can't just sit in my office in Austin. I have to get out to Manila. I have to get to Brno. I have to get to Cork. I have to get to all of the offices in the Bay Area, around the globe, and really ask questions. What are we like when we're at our best? What's great about the culture right now? What do you think is broken? I also ask things about, well, what do you think are the top 3 priorities for the company? And so why do I ask that? That's like the business objectives. What are we trying to accomplish? I get a sense of alignment, what the engineering team is saying versus the finance team versus the sales team. Just like, are we aligned? Do we understand what we're trying to accomplish, number one? And then what are we like when we're at our best? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I do believe that who we are at our core is back to that idea of velocity and trust and clarity of standards that allows you to accomplish what we're trying to do. But if we're also misaligned on there's a relation to that on the culture that might denote broken communication. It might, like, if we don't really understand what we're trying to accomplish as a business, back to the culture aspect, there might be something going on with communication. There might be something going on with silos, and that's preventing the convergence factor from accelerating. So, couple of things.
So you are, as quick as possible, trying to assess and understand whether the culture the company is trying to have is what they're living on a daily basis, and then you try to identify the gaps, and together with the leaders, improve on and get to the point that everybody believes you should be, right? The core of it.
And so here's the trick. So you get out around the globe, you ask these questions, you develop, a bunch of notes, and you can run them through ChatGPT. You can socialize them with your team. Like, hey, what have I gotten wrong here? And then you sit down with the CEO, or you sit down with the executive team, and like, hey, here's what I've learned. Here's my, my world tour, what I've learned about the culture in the first 90 days, and what's maybe broken, or what's like sort of, people are frustrated about in the culture. And then when we've been at our best, and I have an angle to share there, but when we're at our best, this is what shows up. These are the sort of, where we have high trust, we speak openly, we're very collaborative, we're empathetic, whatever they are. And then I share it with the executive team and the CEO. And what you might have happen in that moment is the CEO says, no. That's where are you hearing that? What do you, and I'll give you an example of a prior company at SolarWinds. Our 4 values, we have collaborative, accountable, ready, and empathetic. At a prior company that shall remain nameless, an idea of kindness. Kindness was something I was hearing about routinely in all my travels. And I really thought that was the core of the company. And so we're going through an exercise to codify the values, which we hadn't done before. This was a founder-led company, very, very innovative, very fast-moving, very scaling very fast. And I sat down with him, and I revealed these 4 or 5 things. And at the core of it was kindness. And he crossed it out. He's like, I don't like that. What does kindness mean? And he had a very visceral negative reaction to it. And as I kind of teased it out, I saw what he was seeing, that the challenges with kindness. Kindness can mean I'm not going to tell you the hard thing. So he had a struggle with something that the rest of the company felt was at its core, but he was worried that if we codified that there was a negative undertone to it. So how do we work through that? But at that same company, something I learned was there was an incident at the company that was very consumer facing, and it was in the news, and it was like this company failed, this huge big fail to the consumers. And as that was happening, the entire company, it was an event. It was like a live event on location. The entire company rallied, around solving this issue. It was a technical challenge that prevented something from working for consumers. And there was consumers around the employees of all levels, badgering them, complaining, and they stayed through the entire day to fix this issue. And that became, it was cited as culture is not just, what happens when things are, on cloud nine, everything's working really well. Hey, we're kind to each other, we're collaborative, we're high performing, whatever. It's when things have failed, do those things, so same things show up. Do those same core elements show up to carry you through when times are at its worst? So your culture is more so what shows up when times are really hard than, when times are, peachy. And so that was an important lesson for me as we're building culture.
Do you think companies are true to their values? I mean, most organizations out there, if you open their webpage, you go to the About page, wherever you find the list of values written down, beautifully written down. Like, what percentage do you think of companies out there really live up to their values?
I don't think any company perfectly lives up to their values. And I think even whatever you consider as a company out there that you look to and say that's a great culture, everything I can read from it, that's a great culture. They might have, in their values, like we state accountability. Even we have moments where at the senior leadership levels, you could observably point to a leader and say, I'm not sure if that leader was accountable for what just happened there. And it's frequently cited as like, okay, you want me to do this, but I can look around and I can see at the most senior level that doesn't appear to be that you're holding that person accountable, and you have this clash. And so I don't think any company lives up to the values. And I think that's part of the deal, because you're aspiring towards it. And if you can challenge each other, that like, hey, I want to challenge you in this AMA or this, an all hands or whatever, I want to challenge and say, we say this, but I don't see this happening. I don't see us being accountable for this thing that happened to the customer. And if you can say it and call it out, and then we as an executive team, we recognize that and say, that's on us. We have to work on this. And so, like, acknowledge things openly that are not working is part of it. It's like, we're not living up to this, but we can acknowledge it. We can talk about it. And what are we doing about it? We're not hand waving it away. We're not sort of burying the question and not addressing it. So I don't think any company lives up to its values, but it's really, what are you doing about it? And can we call that out openly is the important thing.
It's interesting with your current journey, because you mentioned that the company got acquired, and when a company got acquired, even if the company had some similar kind of understanding about the world, values, and so on, there's still some differences, I would imagine. So what was your role in the past, like 12, 15 months, the time you've been in the company, when it comes to creating this kind of alignment in between the organization that acquires and the other organization?
Well, it's kind of twofold, I'd say. So one is, as we get acquired, you're acquiring company acquires you because there's something good there. There's something good there. We believe in you, so we're going to acquire the company. And in our case, we're very profitable. We're a leader in our space, but there's also something that is maybe missing. that we can achieve, that the acquiring company believes. And they have a different model. Let's say they have a different business model. And we're gonna go out to market a little bit differently than what you've done before. We're gonna structure agreements differently. We're gonna go out to customers differently. And just in that, you're gonna have people in 2,200 person company that disagrees with it, that doesn't buy into that. And so, through that, you're also going to transform the org. You might go through a big reorganization, which we have just done recently. We've moved from a functional model to a business unit model. Big reorg. Can be messy at times, can be like, gosh, we don't have everything figured out. And through all that massive change, acquired business model change, transform the org, reorganize, everyone starts to question, do I want to be here? Do I want to be here for this? Like, hey, are we remaining true to who we are? So something that we did in the past 6 months was we led an effort, kind of grassroots. One of my team members and someone from the marketing team partnered together to re-examine the values. They had focus group conversations. They went out to employees and all the sites. Hey, what are we like when we're at our best? What are you struggling with right now? And we got to see back to that convergence, the alignment. We got to see from employees' perspectives, what are they worried about? I'll give you an example. Empathy. Are we being empathetic to customers if we're changing up agreements on them? Are we really being that? So I worry about that. I'm not sure how empathy shows up in this new model for us. And so in our re-examining the values, the company could, completely restate the values. Hey, we're a different company now. Or they could say, we're going to take on the values. Now we're just the values of our acquiring company. Those are our new values. And we didn't do that. We actually wound up saying, the four same values that were codified, 4 or 5 years ago, they are still who we are when we're at our best, that we want to aspire towards, even though we have some employees disagreeing with them. And so we restate it a little bit. You restate, what does collaborative look like in this new environment? What is accountable? What is ready? What is empathetic in this new environment? We restate, in a rubric. We restate through stories. Stories are really powerful as you're building culture. We restated that in our global kickoff back in January. We restated these are the same things for us that we're holding true, that we aspire towards, and here's how it will show up. And now in every all hands, we open up an all hands with a story. So we have an all hands coming up soon, and one of our executives is going to share a story about how accountability showed up, and how that is a role model for us. And so, but that was part of my role. Was not to like lead that effort. I'm really conscious of, I don't want the CPO to like be the author of culture, to be the person who is like stating to everyone, this is what we're doing. I really want it to be others standing up, who they can look to and say, that's a culture ambassador. If that person is saying it, I really buy it. It's not David saying it, who's only been here since January, but that's someone who is in a different part of the globe, is a different role. And so that was a big part of the past 6 months, was re-examining the values amidst the transformation, and then connecting it back to like, if we do these things, we will achieve these new business objectives that we have. And whether you like it or not, we're being clear. Clarity of standards. This is who we are. And, if you don't like it, we want to help you move on and do something different. We don't want people to stay who are miserable in it or disagree with it. But you got to get to that transparency, that clarity for people, so that they can opt into it. And if you don't, if you're like, hey, we're just not going to talk about culture, we're like, we have new goals, just this is what's important. I think you run the risk of really great talent, who, if you just codified, if you explained it, would buy in. And if you talk to them openly about it, you risk losing your good talent if you don't re-examine, if you don't go back to, this is who we are, this is how we're going to accomplish, all these lofty goals. So that was a big part just the past 6 months alone.
No, I love it, man. Alignment, communication, getting on the same page. And I think one part that many organizations struggle with, and I think it's going to be very useful for all the people listening, especially the HR leaders out there, is how do we effectively communicate all those things, right? Because you get together, you talk about it, these are the values, these are the behaviors, that's what we believe in, right? You kind of align with a certain group. Mm-hmm. But then when you have 20,000 people, you can communicate it, but how do you communicate it in a way that they understand it, not just on paper, but in terms of the behaviors, and actually they start living it?
Yeah. So 100%. I have found that, your rubric, just stating it is a fraction. It's the stories. It's the stories that we continue to tell each other, both good stories and also bad stories, but stories that I can connect with, maybe cerebrally, but hopefully on an emotional level. I can connect with this because values are inherently, there's an emotion to it. And through stories, they become real. So we're never going to be done with this idea of storytelling, but we now open up every all hands with a story. We have done these things called, one of my team members, Anupama, came up with this idea called a day in the life. And so we go to an engineer in our Brno office, and she shares a 1-minute clip of waking up, getting coffee, like how she, gets the kids out to school, or how she, how she gets ready in the day, and then her commute, and then, her experience at the company. And maybe there's maybe you see something there around empathy or collaboration that's happening in her story, but maybe not. Maybe you just sort of see this is a real person who's talking about her experience. We are a real company with experiences. And so a day in the life is another aspect to this. And I think, as we do AMAs, and we have this ideal of transparency as well, and that we will answer the tough questions, keeping dialogue going. So keeping dialogue going openly, addressing real issues that are going on, addressing tough questions. I think also is a way that you build your culture. And it's a related aspect to storytelling, but this idea of having open dialogue is a really, and it's hard to do whether you're 2,000 employees or 20,000 employees, because what happens, here's a phenomenon that can happen in AMAs, right? What can happen as you scale in AMAs is you get more scripted. So we get questions in through Slido or through some anonymous form, and then we share the questions. Here's the questions, and we start answering them. How do you answer them? Do you answer them scripted? Do you answer them and sort of give a very hand-wavy answer? So you didn't really answer it, but you kind of pretend as if you answered it. Then employees, particularly as you scale, it becomes performative. And like, yeah, we're doing AMAs, but this sounds like a bunch of BS. This sounds like corporate, sanitized answers. And that's a really big challenge for companies that if they think, hey, we're being transparent, we have AMAs, we have all hands, we answer questions. If you have that phenomenon, what happens is people stop asking questions, and then you have to like seed questions, and it becomes like a whole show, and it becomes, like a kind of a dance that you're doing. And that's tough. And so you have to also say when you don't know the answer. And this was a big learning I had at Eventbrite. Was there would be moments where I would just, I or the CEO would say, I really don't know the answer to that question. This is tough for us. And if anyone else has an idea, we're open to it. But a job, the leader, particularly through tough times, is to put more truth out into the world. And truth can be, I don't know the answer to this question. And that's uncomfortable, for an executive when you're getting a question, you say, I don't know, but it's better than giving a hand wavy answer.
Yeah, and here maybe to add to this, to tell the truth, but to tell the truth from a place of strength. Because you can also tell the truth and panic and spread this kind of energy. Like you need to have the calm demeanor, but also reveal the truth and be vulnerable when you don't know the answers to have the team help you and support you.
Yeah, here's what we don't know, but here's what we do know. And here's some things we have to figure out. Here are some questions we have to work through. So you can share what you don't know, share what you do know. And yeah, I think coming from a point of strength, that you mentioned vulnerability. I think people, if you're listening, you're 2,000 employees and you're listening to an executive describe something that has been tough for them personally, that you can kind of see the strain on them, and they're being vulnerable in the moment, and they want help on it. That's much better than, I think, projecting inauthentic strength. We will figure this out. This is not a problem for us. I'm not worried about this in the least, and you're trying to project strength. even though the person asked this tough question, you don't have a really good answer for it, and you say, like, hey, this is not a problem for us. We're not worried about this at all. That's inauthentic, and I think people see through that. So you're much better off in being a little bit vulnerable if you're faced with a question that you don't feel confident about.
And to get back to what we were discussing with the communicating the values, the culture, spreading it across the organization, I think another complexity I can imagine is I just seen a LinkedIn post that you had from Bangalore, and
Yeah.
and then when you add to the whole complexity and equation different cultures when it comes to geographically and so on, that's a I mean, a few weeks ago there was a speaker, and he made a post, David. I think he did an event with some entrepreneurs from Africa.
Mm.
And he did a post, and the post was, "I'm so happy to see so many hungry Africans to join my event." And then we had a little bit of chat. And I'm like, maybe you don't want to use this word with this region, right? Because like some of them could be a little bit, because the countries that are there, that might be a word that can trigger something, right? So you have to be very careful about the culture. And he was like, "Oh man, I didn't think about it at all. I was just like hunger." Like it's like, yeah, but there's actually many people in these regions that might be something that's really difficult for them. Just maybe say something else, right? So thinking about the values, the words and the values, they might mean something in the US, but the way people understand them in India might be something different. And that's kind of also interesting. How do you kind of explain and maybe adapt, because the way they work and operate, it's going to be different, right?
100%. Empathy. What empathy could mean in Cork versus Brno, or Manila versus Krakow. I think I've been to some offices where the culture is very stoic. And so what I mean by that is, there's a sort of an almost lack of response when you answer a question. And then you worry about that. You don't see head nodding. You don't see a enthusiasm for your answer. And you might mistake that like these people are mad at you, and like they disagree with you. And hey, are we, is there empathy in this moment? We have empathy for each other, versus another culture is very friendly and deference to authority, and they're agreeing with everything that you said. And it's a very visibly affirmative. It's a bit visibly like sort of tend to agree with everything that you're saying, maybe because that's kind of deference to authority is more normal in that culture. And that could lead you to believe that, hey, there's a mismatch here. Like this office over here doesn't have the same sensibilities and empathy that this office does. But that's a mistaken inference. And you have to spend time with that culture, and you might make a mistake. You might say the wrong thing, and you learn from it. And I think if people understand that, you mean well and you're trying to learn from your mistakes, and this is a new executive in town, and that executive comes back and continues to spend time with us and is curious, is asking questions as opposed to pontificating. They see that you're curious and you're trying to learn. But yeah, I think that there are different sensibilities of even your values, different sensibilities. They show up differently. And that could still mean that we agree with them, but we think of them differently. They show up differently for us. When we're being empathetic to each other, it's not just me being really deferential to you. It's not just me agreeing to everything that you say. I might disagree with everything that you said, and it feels very tough. Like, oh, this is a tough conversation. They're really grilling me here right now. I feel there's almost a sense of meanness to this question, but that in their minds that might mean like, I really value and I respect you. I can disagree with you openly, and that is empathy. That is empathy to us. If I wasn't empathetic to you, I wouldn't be even asking you a question, or I wouldn't be giving you the time of day. And so you got to learn about that, because I think there are different sensibilities depending upon where you are in the globe to your core, your 4 core values.
David, you worked in many organizations, some of them high growth, fast scaling. How do you make sure that you protect the soul of the values, the culture, with so many new people coming in the company, so the culture doesn't get diluted? Like, where's the sweet spot between protecting the soul of the organization but also being enriched by the new people?
Well, I think back to, we have to be able to project who we are to the world, so that if I'm going to respond to the recruiter or I'm going to apply to your job, I know what I'm opting into. That's a really important. I think Coinbase is a company that does this really well. It's a culture that that have gone through some iterations and sort of a necessity to explain more of who they are and what they believe in. And as they did that, I remember dialogue with fellow CPOs where they would criticize it, like, wow, I can't believe they're embracing X, they're embracing something that seems objectionable to me. And so I remember a fellow CPO chimed in and said, yeah, but what they're describing, at least you can opt in or opt out of it. And that aspect of being clear who we are, in our public facing materials, our press, our podcasts, our interviews, whatever, the more that we can do that, the more people can opt out. And then as you get into an interview, are we assessing culture in a way where it's not really about culture fit, but it's culture add? But how are we assessing for collaboration? How are we assessing for empathy? So we have values interviews, which seek to understand, as one part of it. And an example is, can I reasonably predict that this person will be successful in how we collaborate, versus are they much more, apt to be a lone wolf? They're really good at what they do, but they want to be left alone. They don't want to be challenged. They're really smart, but this collaboration, there's something inherent in this collaboration thing where I from the evidence they gave us, it doesn't seem as though they're comfortable collaborating in the type of environment that we have. And that has to be a knock in the interview. And it can be a challenge because it's like, this person's brilliant. Why are we knocking them on our values assessment? And as long as we can provide, objective evidence there, and the panelists can describe it in a way that fits our sort of assessment rubric, that winds up becoming really helpful. I found it at Twitter. I remember looking at our involuntary attrition, so everyone who we had to let go, and we analyzed the reasons for the exit. 80% of the time, we had to let someone go for behaviors, for values mismatches. It was 20% of the time was like a functional, like, hey, they're not really good at this, this job, this engineering job we hired them for. They don't really know their stuff. That was only 20% of the time. It was 80% of the time was this idea of a values mismatch was what came out in how they worked with others. And so that values interview, which again is not just about how are they going to assimilate, can they be like us, but can they add in a way that amplifies our values? They can add to our atmosphere of collaboration, of being accountable to themselves and others, of being ready, of being adaptable to change. And that winds up, in many cases being more important than how brilliant they are.
And this is a very important topic. Last week, I had a HR leader, and we had this discussion, and she was sharing that for her, it's really difficult to understand somebody just from the interview, because they're doing something on culture fit, but then you hire somebody, and what she was arguing is that you never know who the person is before they start working for you. What would be your answer to that?
Well, you can always get it wrong, and we get it wrong. And we got it wrong at Twitter. We got it wrong, at really successful companies. And a lot of studies on, on assessments, the Schmidt and Hunter study, which looked at like 19 different ways to assess candidates. And, the best combination of assessment methodologies structured behavioral-based interviews, work samples, cognitive ability tests, whatever they were, the combination of them at best, we get to about, maybe a little bit over a 50% predictive validity. So a little bit more than a coin flip. Will we get it right perfectly? So meaning the assessment, like, hey, we perfectly forecasted whether this person will be successful. It's not to say that 50% of your hires will be bad, but 50% roughly are a little bit more variable. And so I think in that like, hey, we really don't know who they are at their core. The types of questions the question I like to ask is, tell me about an example. Tell me about a time when something bad happened, when there was a cross-functional conflict, or a project went haywire, or a customer was really upset at an outcome, whatever. But you're painted into a corner. The question here is about something that something bad happened. And then how did I manage out of it? How did I lead people? How did I resolve it? And that, as they're giving that story, you probe and you push. But the point is to give examples back to that like idea of a company where something bad happened and the customer is wherever everyone was upset. You want to know how they showed up. And, people can always have a canned answer. But I think in that moment where times are tough, you're going to have more moments where you can probe. Tell me more about what do you mean by that? What did you do? I understand what the team did, but what did you do in that moment? And then what did you learn from this? Did you learn something from it? And you're more likely to get a little bit better signal than if you're asking them to, like, tell me about your greatest success. Tell me about something that you're proud of. Tell me, if you're asking questions that are inherently, it's a leading question for them to give you something great about themselves, or something that they built, something where they were wildly successful, then you're more likely to get the incomplete picture. You want to know how they show up when times are tough.
That's a good one. Thanks for sharing, David. And I'm wondering, you wrote me once on LinkedIn and you asked me, hey, Stoyan, one thing that I might be curious to learn is, would you recommend some interesting people in the space that I can follow? And here comes the question: who do you follow? Like, who are some of these leaders, maybe podcasts or even some books that you read lately that inspire you?
Gosh, that's a great question. I have a friend named Lars Schmidt who wrote a book, Redefining HR, and he interacted with a lot of CPOs in his line of work, and is really open and sharing the best practices that he's learned of from other CPOs. Very open share on LinkedIn. So Lars is definitely one I like to follow, but I like to follow, CEOs and learn about how they're thinking of culture and their business challenges and how they're thinking about building their companies. So what I try not to do is follow too many fellow CPOs. Earlier in my career, that was a little bit more of my mode of I wanted to learn, like, how did you get there? Like, how did you become successful? And I remember the Google Chief People Officer and sort of thinking about these very successful CPOs who also wrote books. But at a certain point in my career, and I became a CPO, I started learning a little bit less from my colleagues, and I learned more from people who are board members, who are who work at venture capital or private equity, and I learned, for instance, that a lot of CEOs, but also board members and people in venture and private equity, many times look at what CPOs do as performative. And so meaning that the things that we think are really progressive and mean a lot and very valuable and sensible and logical can wind up being viewed in the eyes of the people that you report to as performative, as not really attributing to company success. That might feel as though these are charades that we go through, these exercises, these people team led exercises are creating a lot of busy work for us and I'm gonna go through it, kind of just because you're telling me to, but you don't really have me hooked. And I sat down with a private equity leader who's brilliant, and use that word with me of like, hey, in our portfolio, our experience with a lot of CPOs is it seems like a lot of what you do is performative. And that was like a wake up call for me as, and not all, private equity and venture and board people think that way, but I think that was a wake up call for me. I need to be thinking about my role primarily as first of all, leading business. And I need to understand the business goals, and I need to build my business acumen. And my business acumen is not going to come from fellow CPOs. It's going to come from the CFO. It's going to come from the CEO. It's going to come from the board. And that business acumen, and then how people efforts are the work that we do and our strategy, how that ladders up to it, has to start with that business goal in mind. So I don't have any CEOs in particular that I would cite, but just more learning from CEOs and board members has been more recently in my career more important than who I follow, like in the people space, if that makes sense.
That's brilliant, man. That's brilliant. Like putting yourselves in their shoes, understanding what their issues are, and how the role of HR and people management, your role is contributing to the business success, not being seen in isolation, but how are we as a department, as a direction, contributing to overall success of the organization, also in terms of numbers and results? What are the biggest pain points, challenges of the CEO, of the board, of and how can you accommodate that? So many HR leaders are struggling for resources, right? Often we don't have resources for these programs. But I think this approach, where you understand what the board and the CEO and the leadership is struggling with, and making it maybe more quantifiable, like the communication, I guess, as well, the way you communicate with the CEO, in a way you can just say, hey, here's a very nice thing, people will like it, right? Like it has to be measurable, quantifiable with numbers.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote something yesterday about productivity and engagement. That's an example of something I'm talking about, which is we all love engagement in our, CPO circles, engagement, your engagement score and the survey and, sort of the things that you learned from it. And, I think particularly now, but perhaps forever, CEOs and their boards have been thinking about productivity. We talk about engagement because there's a theoretical connection to high engagement equals high productivity. It's theoretical. I don't buy it as much as I used to, for a couple of different reasons. But yeah, if I can speak credibly, in the first couple of minutes, I can describe in our sales team right now, our conversion, our challenges that we're having in the funnel, the connection back to marketing, the go-to-market model that we have right now, where we're building, the stage that we're in right now in conversion, in the motion, in the subcon motion to moving to new logo and expansion growth. And like, if I can describe that, and then I get to, and thus here's an org design, or here's a solution, or here's headcount, or here's a recruiter role that we need to fund an incremental headcount to my team. If I can get to that at the end by first describing what we're trying to do, how we're trying to accomplish it right now, why we're struggling with it, what are some solutions that we can pursue, and then why this is the best solution. That's a little bit different than what I think all CPOs find themselves in, is like, I need headcount and I'm not getting it. And I'm feeling disrespected for my lack of, I see other teams growing and we're over here, we're being asked to shrink. And that's because they don't value the people function, and I'm going to leave because of it. It's like, maybe, but also maybe, how are you getting to your conclusions? How are you engaging? How are you building trust? I'm building trust through my executive team by first understanding what they're trying to do and speaking credibly to it, and operating more as a business leader first and a people leader second. I think has been, at least for me, a big learning for how I, ultimately get to what I think we need. And then depersonalizing it. I think if I can feel as though I've accurately understood our business challenges, what we're trying to accomplish, our history, what's worked and what's not worked, What are the different challenges that each leader has? They might be constrained in different ways. So our budget might be constrained. And I understand the barriers that you have to even my pitch I'm about to give. And then even if amidst all that, I still get to a no and like, hey, we're not going to do this. I should hopefully feel as I understand the no, I understand it. And I could say, okay, well, this, if we don't do this, I think I can predict what, the outcomes are going to be. It's not going to be good for the business. We're co-owning it. We're co-owning that solution as opposed to, this has been me versus them. It's people versus the rest of the company. And, if you can avoid that mistaken thinking, you still get to a no, but you're co-owning it together. And you can explain to your own people team why we're not going to fund this one role, why we're not going to get the budget for this thing. Why we don't have a travel budget right now for an offsite. And I can describe it in a way that it's connecting back to our business realities right now. Then your team will buy it. Then your team will understand it. So anyways.
I love this because it's such a proactive approach. And even if the C-level, the CEO is maybe not so much of a people person and more technical, and it's not so good in explaining, like instead of accepting the reality, you can be the proactive one that, first of all, is really well prepared to defend with arguments, with financial arguments, business arguments, but also you can inspire this conversation, and you can inspire the CEO, the C-level to give you a picture, to paint you a picture of the whole situation, so you can understand why it's a no. And of course, at some point, if you get many no's and it's not the right kind of a place, of course you can leave, but not just immediately. Like this, such more not like from victim to taking ownership, right? So that's great, man. What's another? So what is another? Let's call it mindsets or skills, or on top of the business mindset that we have to acquire, what should a modern HR leader pay attention to for the next 3 years, let's say? Like maybe some skills and mindsets we haven't really taught before. They were not so relevant before.
Well, it's top of mind for me what I wrote yesterday, but the idea of productivity and what does productivity mean in the environment that we're moving towards. Ultimately, I believe if you're a people leader, you are trying to build a high performing culture. People is 70% of our operating expenses. It's the collection of people in the teams, and are they performing well? Are they working well together? What are our high performing teams, our low performing teams? What is high performance? What does great look like? Do we have clear standards on our performance? And I can understand that. I can understand the connection to if we become high performing, not only as a company, but in sales and engineering, if we worked well together, if these two teams become high performing together, if I can understand that ultimately it connects back to productivity. And I think we've been a little bit too enamored with engagement as like the theoretical lens on productivity. And I think people leaders of the future, engagement's an input to productivity. And I think understanding productivity, how does it show up with AI, understanding output signals, understanding velocity, understanding, dialogue in the company, and our decisions getting made fast. So productivity as the necessary aspect to high performance. I think another skill is being more of a technologist than a psychologist. I think psychology will always be inherent in your role as a people leader. Industrial psychology is, kind of a precursor for many people getting into this field. But being a technologist, in the next 3 years, next 10 years, more so than being an expert psychologist, how our systems connect to each other to create velocity, to create high performance. What is our people stack, and is it allowing managers to make better decisions? Is it enabling, not just allowing, is it enabling managers to make better decisions from end to end, from who we find in the market, who we go after, to who we select, to how we onboard them, to how we then manage the team, and then having the right signals through our tools, our stack of tools, not just people tools, by the way, enterprise corporate productivity tools, your enterprise AI layer that we use to work together. Like employees work not with our people tools, not with the HRES, or the performance management system. They work together in email we use a tool called Glean. We use a fractured stack of tools like Slack and Teams, which can kind of be an issue. But understanding the connected corporate productivity tools in the company, understanding them as a technologist, more so than a psychologist, becomes a skill that's really important. I have seen more recently a really, really prominent AI company hire essentially a technologist into the CPO role, someone who is, only recently led a people team, but their whole background is engineering and IT. We've also, the listeners probably will have seen instances where, people leaders are being asked to sort of take on a combination remit of technology or IT aspects and people functions together. I think that's a trend, that we should all embrace and get ready for, is that as people leaders, you're going to be, more successful as a technologist than a psychologist.
And in that sense, what do you do to stay updated? Like specifically on a weekly basis, do you test some AI tools? Do you listen to podcasts? Do you have some advice? Like, what do you do to make sure that all the right things, you kind of already have your hands dirty around them? And
we demo tools all the time. So I have one of my team members, Fran, has been excellent at this. And so I do a little bit myself. I also ask my team, and we'll talk about, here's a process, or here's something that we need to accomplish. Let's go out and research. Let's talk with other people leaders. Let's talk with, other founders. Let's talk with vendors, companies that are building this, and then demo it. In some cases, we might pilot something, but just in the sort of weekly or monthly demos and speaking with HCM companies, startups, oftentimes has been one part of it. I definitely, and back to when I do talk with my fellow CPOs, I learn a lot from them about tools that they're using, but not just getting enamored with a tool like, hey, this is the best, applicant tracking system in the world. Not just that, but how did you adopt it? How are you connecting it? How did you redefine your workflow? I was listening to a speaker at one of the recent conferences talk about, moving to agentic HR has required them to rethink all their HR workflows and end to end completely resetting how work gets done, how we manage to recycle, but also deal with hires and then internal compensation changes. They've rethought it end to end. And so thinking about your capabilities, and this speaker said, in any given HR team, you might have 100 different workflows, HR workflows across, recruiting, compensation, business partners, people systems, learning, et cetera. And of those 100, though, a couple of them might be where you want to start with resetting the workflow and where we want an agent, where we want AI to play versus where we want the human to play. And but that, back to your question, you kind of want to understand what good looks like and how do we want this to work versus what I think a lot of people teams, we run the risk of just, let's adopt this tool because we hear it's great. Others are adopting it. Let's adopt it. And then boom, we're bolting on AI to the compensation process now. And then you get disappointed because, hey, this isn't really changing the behaviors. This is not really working. And maybe it's because we didn't start with, redefining how we want that workflow to work. Where do we want the human to play the role? Where do we think the human is best in this workflow versus where AI, can help us? Then we get to the vendor. Then we decide, is this tool right? But then also the dependencies on it. Is the IT team ready to take this on, as a project with us to connect it to other enterprise systems and such? So, but yeah, demos have definitely been a big part of it.
And this is primarily for the tech related to HR function, to the HR function. Do you also, and this is going to be the final question, we can wrap up the episode, do you also have to partly be part of the process of the AI adoption for the overall organization in the HR function of the organization? And is that overwhelming these days? Like, what would be your advice? Maybe we can kind of wrap it up with this answer. What would be your advice to all the HR leaders out there who are right now struggling to figure out what to focus on?
Well, you got to build your alliance. So fellow David in my company is the CIO, David Ramsey, and he is equally passionate about AI to me. And so we're an alliance, and the tool that he's leading adoption internally of the enterprise AI layer is something that has an immediate use case for the people team. And so he's worked with me to prioritize the people team to getting access to this tool. We're kind of rolling it out in waves. But I think a thing one of our executive teams, our CEO actually said, as we were debating purchasing this tool, moving fastly to adopt it, and then there's a budget element to it. There's a conversation that oftentimes is missed, which is, why are we doing this? Like, what do we want from this? And like the core thesis for adopting this, and what do we want this to power for us? What does great look like? But the why of this AI initiative has to be clear from the beginning. And I think that's important too, because employees will rightly want to know, well, what is this going to mean for me? If this is suddenly making it easier for me to code, or you're taking 80% of my work off my plate, what does that mean for me? And being able to explain why and how we want it to up-level the people team or the engineering team to be able to work on higher order problems. We believe that you should shift from, doing this manual work to spending more time coaching leaders. We believe that you should be spending more time in innovation rather than, in a very heavy code base. And we want you to be solving problems and using judgment and innovation as more of the core of your role than this manual work over here. Excuse me. And we need you. We need you for that. Versus just, there's no thesis for this. We're just moving fast to adopt it. That was a bit of a course correction that we had to make recently, just to sort of get aligned as an executive team of the why behind some of our like enterprise level AI initiatives.
Well, David, thank you so much for being with us. Before we wrap up, I want to give you the space to share where could people connect with you, maybe with SolarWinds. If you guys have any open positions, like you name it, the floor is yours. Let's wrap up the episode.
Please. Yeah. Take a look at our careers website. We are hiring around the globe. We have a lot of roles open in our go-to-market function, everything from account executives to marketing managers, to leadership roles as well. We have engineering roles that we're prioritizing in Europe and APJ. So, but connect with me on LinkedIn, and hopefully this has given a little bit of a taste of who we are as a company, SolarWinds. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I would love to hear from people.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks everybody for making it to the end of the episode. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the Productivity Mastery. Incredible guests, and the more people subscribe, the more we have the chance to get incredible people like David on the podcast. So make sure to press this button, and have a fantastic day. See you next time for the next episode of the Productivity Mastery podcast. Bye-bye.